welcome you to our Careers in Regulatory Affairs panel discussion for PhDs and postdocs. Our guest panelists today include Duke postdoc Dr. Kathy Anderson, currently Senior Regulatory Scientist at Cato Research, Dr. Randy Badenhorst, VP Global Regulatory Affairs at GlaxoSmithKline, Dr. Helena Bergwin, Director of Regulatory Affairs, Duke Translational Medicine Institute, Dr. Noel Bird, also a former postdoc, Regulatory Scientist at United Therapeutics, and Dr. Vicky Gunto, Director of Regulatory Affairs, King Pharmaceuticals. We will begin with the panelists to my far right, Dr. Anderson, speaking or sharing information with regard to their individual training and their career progression. Then I will share some of the questions that you have already submitted to us. If time remains following that, then the floor will be open for any additional questions that you might have. Thank you.
Good morning. I guess I can start. But like many of you, I started with a very different plan than I ended up with. So going into college, I expected to be a physician, and having spent some time in the hospital as an intern during the summers, decided that was not the career path I wanted. So ended up at Clemson University and did a bachelor's in microbiology, went from there and did a PhD in microbiology at NC State in saccharomyces cerevisiae. And deciding I wanted to do a little something different for the postdoc, came here to Duke and was over at the LSRC Center, so that's very familiar as I was walking by this morning, in plants, of all things. And about the time my principal investigator, Bruce Pilkmore, who some of you may have known, although he's moved on for a number of years now, moved to Maine. I was about 5 months pregnant with our first child and decided that it was a good time to take a year off. Then I went to Vera Crop Science out in the Triangle, working on plants still, and spent a year there when they closed down that site. At the time I was pregnant with my second, about 9 months pregnant with my second child, so it was again a good time to take a year off. And having the 2 children at that point, decided that bench research was not going to really work with 2 small children. And although I very much liked bench research and I worked with some really excellent people and the work was very interesting, decided I wanted to look into something else. And one of the people I worked with at Vera Crop Science went into the regulatory side on plants. So having talked to her as I looked into going back to work when my younger child was almost 1, decided that that might be a good career path. And as I looked at the opportunities that were around, at that time the plant industry was not doing all that well, and decided that there was a really good potential in medicines and a good future in that field. And Cato Research has a great program called the Fellows Program. And I applied for that and came in that way, and it's a year-long training program where you get a lot of exposure to different things in the clinical trial field, the regulatory field. And through that program, decided yes, that was a career I would like to pursue. And at this point, I am still at Cato Research and have moved into the regulatory side. I've been there since December 2004, so I'll let you do the math because it's a little early in the morning. But I really enjoyed it. There are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of growth opportunities, and definitely, although I enjoyed my time at the bench, I don't miss having been at the bench. I don't ever wake up and go, I wish I was still in the lab. There are some people that would. So some people try an alternate career and go back to the bench because it doesn't work for them. But it's been a good transition for me, and it's worked for my family, and I never feel like there's not a challenge to be dealt with every day. So it's a good fit for me.
Okay, I'm Randy Badenhorst. I'm with GlaxoSmithKline. Been there for about 22 years. Before that, I started off as a pharmacist, but was very interested in clinical development, clinical research. So I got my PharmD from the University of Kentucky in Lexington and got involved with mainly a lot of normal volunteer studies, so phase 1 clinical development type type studies, and also some work in post-operations care area, post-surgery area, looking at analgesic activity and kind of an extension of what was then known as patient-controlled analgesia. So we introduced that. Our group did to the U.S. back in the early 80s. I spent time in academia for about 7 years at the University of Kentucky. Was in the clinical area. Was the clinical pharmacist in charge of the intensive care unit in adult medical services. And then I left there, went to the University of Illinois in Chicago, and started a phase 1 clinical research unit there. And also became heavily involved with the Office of Sponsored Research. So this was a group at the university that interfaced with the pharmaceutical companies and also ran their ethics committee. So I was vice chair of their ethics committee for about 5 years while I was there. The university is an interesting place in Illinois because it sits in Chicago and the state legislature is elsewhere. And there's a big dynamic between the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, and they decided to close University Hospital. And so at that time, they decided, well, it's time for a career change. My wife is from Florida. She really didn't like Chicago. We love Chicago for the city, but it snows a bit much. And so we looked for opportunities, and I ended up in turning over to the dark side, some people say, to move to the pharmaceutical industry. So I joined the Welcome organization in the park, and subsequently went to Glaxo, and then became Glaxo, Welcome, Glaxo, whatever. And so I started off in clinical development. I did that for about 15 years. Worked in the antiviral area, but mainly in the neurosciences area. So I did that and saw drugs from first time in man all the way through marketing. Got involved with we had a group that actually Alan Roses was a professor here at Duke, came to Glaxo in the late 90s and created a pharmacogenetics group, and so I actually became part of that group, looking at how do we develop a companion diagnostic with a pharmaceutical, that if we're having a targeted medicine, what would that look like? And so with that, I got involved with discussions with the FDA on their regulatory device side of things rather than the drug side of things, so I got some exposure there. And after about a couple years of doing that, there was an opportunity to move to regulatory affairs, so I did that in 2001, and been there for about 10 years. I've done a lot of things in regulatory affairs. I supported kind of your traditional therapeutic areas, so we are set up we have an oncology group, an infectious disease group, or whatever, and the regulatory person is kind of the interface between the company and the FDA, or if it's Europe with the EMA, or with the other regulatory agencies throughout the world. And so we are involved with that as a direct interface between our project teams and with those folks at the FDA. So I did that for about 8 years. And over the last year or so, we had a different opportunity to do some changes within GSK that I'm now on a temporary assignment for about 18 months in regulatory affairs yet, but now I face the manufacturing organization. So instead of kind of going and talking to FDA about protocols and drug development and all that sort of stuff, I'm now involved with pharmaceutical development. So, how do we develop tablets? How do we develop a biopharmaceutical product and whatnot? And, what do you do at different stages for early development versus phase 3 versus a marketed product? And once a product's on the market, how, if you decide to close a facility, how do you transfer the technology from one facility to another? We acquire new companies. What do we do to bring their technology into our facility, or how do we move stuff out to theirs? So our manufacturing sites, we have about 80 sites throughout the world, because in the past, a lot of countries required you actually had to manufacture drug in their country to get it approved there. Fortunately, that's not the case anymore, so we're now trying to consolidate that. So I have a pretty broad view of regulatory affairs, and we've gone global over the last year or so, so now my current role, I'm responsible globally for CMC regulatory.
My name is Helena Berglund. I came to Duke from Sweden. I finished my PhD in Sweden, and I was working on type 1 diabetes for 5 years. I started my postdoc there also on diabetes, and at that time I didn't plan on moving into any other career path than being scientist and following the standard thing, let's say. But my husband got a job in RTP, and we decided to move to States. So I looked for a stipend that Sweden can provide for me, that I move to Duke or UNC, and look for some postdoc that I can do. So I came here, and I started working in the lab for a year. And just good to say is that I really enjoyed working in science. I really enjoyed doing experiments. I enjoyed working in vivo experiments, so I worked a lot with animals, which is a good thing because it's a lot of fun and you feel that you're doing a little bit more closer to the patient stuff and it's more applicable. The bad stuff is that you can develop allergies, as I did. So I became very, very allergic, and it made me think going to Animal House with all this equipment I had and stuff. So that was maybe one of the reasons, or maybe main reason why I started looking into what else can I do, what are the alternatives. At that point I also started realizing that maybe, which might be true, that if I stay in academic science I might really spend most of my time writing grants, and that's not exactly what I really wanted to do. So I started looking around. I was very lucky to have a Swedish stipend for 2 years that I can be a Duke and say what I'm going to do. And so first year I spent in the lab, but at the end of that first year I started looking around, what are the alternatives? And at least in my life I must say that yes, you need to work hard, but luck plays a big role. So I was really lucky to meet my current boss, Bruce Burnett. So I started chatting with him, and he said that he's Director of Regulatory Affairs. There was a new office forming at Duke. He's looking for people, but basically he just started up at Duke. And at that time I didn't know what regulatory affairs means. I mean, I heard about clinical trials and clinical trial coordinators, but regulatory affairs mean nothing to me. So I used that first year to finish up my experiments, publish papers that were ongoing, but also to volunteer in his newly formed group as a regulatory person, simply. To come a couple of days a week, or when I have a time, to see what does it mean to put one IND together, how one pre-IND meeting look like, and start getting more and more involved in that. And that's how I spent. Now we have some internship program going on, but actually I was the first intern of that group that took a year to learn about regulatory, but also test, is that really what I want to do? Because, I mean, at least for me, and I guess for a lot of you, leaving science, it's a scary thing. Leaving science for unknown, it's a bit scary thing. And again, regulatory didn't do much. But after a year, I must say, I really loved it. And I was again lucky the position got open, and I could apply for a job, and I got a job. And that's how I started my regulatory career here. So what our office does, I mean, I can go on and on, but basically you can find it on Vicky and my website if you search for regulatory group. We are paid by NIH to help investigators at Duke moving clinical trials from bench to bedside or moving it onwards. At the moment we are working on biologic license application for blood banks. So it's really a variety of things. It's interesting. For me, it was very important that I kept that contact with science. I'm not doing any lab work. But then again, you are involved, especially if you get yourself involved in a very early stage of certain projects. So you get to see how things are really transitioning from bench to first in-man trial. You still feel that you are involved in science. You have your input there, you can evaluate experiments, stuff like that. So I was very happy with my transition of how you ended up.
So I'm Noah Bird, similar to Kathy, kind of started out in a non-medicine related field. My undergraduate is in botany, so I was at the University of Tennessee for that. And then kind of at the end of undergrad, I almost contemplated going into law, but had really good experiences doing research as an undergraduate. Then went to grad school and actually switched into cell and developmental biology, thinking kind of long-term about what I might want to transition that into. So I got a PhD in cell and developmental biology from Wesleyan in Connecticut, and then came to postdoc at Duke in 2002. And I moved into congenital heart research. My PhD was in vascular development, And so here I worked on transgenic mouse models of congenital heart research, heart valve defects, and neural tube defects. And I think like many up here, really enjoyed the science, kind of having almost this research autonomy over, where's the project going to go? You follow what's interesting, it takes you to different places. There's the part of writing that up and getting published and securing, extramural funding. That's always a little bit challenging, but that's part of it too. And those are what I kind of consider the rewards in science. You get that publication and you feel like you've had a success. You write many grants, hopefully you get one. I think everybody knows how challenging the funding is. I was lucky and managed to land an NRSA through NHLBI, and so I felt very happy that actually worked out for me. But as I was progressing my postdoctoral studies, I started having these same kind of, revelations. Like, is this really what I want to do? Do I want to continue doing research? Do I feel passionate about it? So much so that I don't care where I end up in the U.S. or not, as the case may be. So at that time, I started kind of thinking about, alternative careers outside of academia. And I think, looking through like Science News and Nature Jobs and things like that, you start seeing things like business development or patent agent or regulatory affairs. And I think it's already been mentioned. It kind of doesn't really mean a whole lot, without that kind of, with any context. I mean, having come all the way through the academic system. And so exactly the same as Kathy, ended up coming up through the Cato Research Fellowship, which is for either recent PhDs or people that have actually also done a postdoc. So I had done a postdoc for 3 years to the day. And actually one of the interesting things about transitioning from academics to industry in this case was because I had that NRSA grant, I had to make sure that I was moving into something that qualified for being relieved from the payback obligation. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. That can become kind of a stressor if you're in the middle of receiving funding and you want to start transitioning out. So fortunately, I had a great, what should we call her, almost like a grant manager at the NIH, and she assured me that everything was working out. So, but until I actually got the paperwork that said, you're relieved from your obligations, that was a little tight. So, at any rate, I moved into Cato Research and did a fellowship in drug development, which basically you just get kind of thrown into the whole system. You may work on some clinical protocols, you may write an investigative brochure, you may work on some parts of an IND, you may sit in business development calls where you're trying to secure business and sell services. And so for me, it was fascinating. It was, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I wanted to learn as much about the industry as I could, and that was a really good way to kind of, get saturated from 360 degrees. At the end of the fellowship, people typically either went the clinical route or they went the regulatory route. As I mentioned, I kind of contemplated law, and so what I found was that it was this nice balance of law and science, and then together those come together for product development strategy. And so I ended up going into regulatory and worked on a lot of early stage programs from candidate identification. You have people coming in and saying, what should we go after? What's a potential indication? Which is very, very early stage. To about phase 2, which is where you really start to get into clinical proof of concept. At that point, you want to interface with the FDA and really lock in designs for pivotal trials to confirm efficacy and hopefully march towards marketing. So I got great experience. I worked with international clients. I worked on small molecules, biologics, some devices. And then moved to United Therapeutics, where I've now been for a year, where I'm the regulatory project lead on a pre-market biologic in the oncology space and a post-market combination product. And I work on the device side of that. And so what's really fun for me is that I get to work with biologics, in the mid-stage product development effort in oncology, and then I work on post-marketing with a device that's regulated both by 2 centers, one for drugs and one for radiological health devices. So it's I don't know, I think what I like is maybe I'm a little bit ADD, but having all sorts of different things to focus on, continuously learn from, I find that very satisfying. Again, I was already mentioned, you end up being the liaison between your company and the FDA, but also providing advice to the project teams. And we have the same kind of issues, what we're seeing, degradants during stability testing, what do we do? So it ends up being kind of a corporate strategy, scientific issue to solve, and then there are, of course, regulatory considerations that you have to keep in mind throughout the whole process. And so that's what I'm doing these days. I enjoy it.
Okay, so being the fifth person on this panel, and given that my story actually has a lot of parallels to others up here, I'll try to keep it short. But feel free during the question and answer if you want me to elaborate on anything, I'm happy to do so. So I'll start in graduate school as far as the story goes and how I got into regulatory affairs. In graduate school, by my fourth year, I realized that I was not going to be an academician. I was not interested in writing grants. Even though I had successfully gotten 2 grants as a graduate student, it wasn't for me. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I started looking around and networking very heavily. I don't know how many of you who are sitting here have already decided on regulatory affairs, or if you're just here out of curiosity, or if this is definitively the career for you. But one of the resources that I found was a book by Cynthia Robbins Roth called Alternative Careers in Science. It's available on Amazon. I checked this morning, so it is still in print. And it's really helpful in giving you some suggestions and ideas about various career opportunities. And regulatory affairs is in there, but there are other things as well. A number of different careers for those leaving the ivory tower, as the book calls it. So I happened upon this book, and in talking with people and telling them about my interest in staying in science, but I don't want to do benchtop research. A friend who was actually doing a postdoc at the time said, you know, what you're talking about sounds like what a friend of mine is currently doing. And so just networking a friend of a friend of a friend, I called this person who actually was at the time working with, I believe it was Pfizer, ironically. You'll understand that later. But, and so he actually was a PharmD and was doing something slightly different. But in speaking with him, he directed me to Cato Research. And so Cato Research, again, as I said, I was in my 4th year, so I actually wasn't ready to apply for the fellowship program at Cato. But what I did was I called the person who was the head of that program and asked for an informational interview with her. And she was a very energetic, exciting person. And in speaking with her, she said, you know what, it's really hard to get a sense of this career change. I mean, this is a huge shift in what you're planning on doing. If you could come down for a summer and intern with us, you could really, learn some things, see if this is really the right fit for you or if you want to do something different. And so at that point, I went to my advisor and I said, I'm not interested in doing benchtop research. I would like to go do this. And he was very honest and said, well, I know nothing about any other career choice you might make but staying in benchtop research. So I can't help you network, but the one thing I can do for you is let you take the summer off. And so he allowed me to come to North Carolina and do this internship for a couple of months at Cato Research. And once I finished, I went back, I finished my PhD, and I then started applying for jobs. And I think the important part of the story here, since you guys have already heard about Cato Research from other folks on the panel, is that by interning, even though it was a minimum wage type situation, I didn't make a lot of money that summer. Not that you make much money as a graduate student, but the key here, because I know a lot of you are thinking, but how do I get to these entry-level positions when I have no experience? Well, for me, once I had Cato Research on my CV, even as an intern, I had, I worked on during that about 4-month period, I worked on a clinical study report, so I had done some medical writing. I had helped with an IND, which is an investigational new drug application. So some of the entry-level activities that I could suddenly then put on my resume or CV and send out for these entry-level positions. And I actually so I did get some interest in doing that. I ended up taking the position with Cato, but I will tell you, one of the other places that I think people, if you're mobile, and if you're interested in staying in the area, that of course brings an additional layer of complexity and challenge in getting an entry-level position in regulatory affairs. But if you're mobile, I would highly recommend that you look at opportunities with the FDA. If you can get FDA experience on your CV or resume, whether that be because you did some sort of an internship, which they do offer, you can do postdocs with FDA, they have field offices in virtually every state. It's invaluable in terms of kind of opening doors for you, because by having those 3 letters on your CV, people will automatically take a second look. And it may not be directly what they're interested in terms of the background that you've acquired in doing that, but the fact is that it's very powerful to have that on your CV, that experience or exposure. So you've already heard a bit about Cato Research. Any of the 3 of us who went that route can tell you more about the kind of opportunities that are offered there. It's a year-long fellowship, and at the end you select either going into clinical trials or regulatory affairs. The 3 of us, or the 3 that have that experience, went into regulatory affairs. And for the record, I brought the 2 of them into regulatory affairs. I'm going last. And I'm proud to say they were good selections. And so I was at Cato Research for 8 years. I had a varied experience at a CRO, which is, Cato is a contract research organization. You'll see that acronym quite a bit. So basically any job that comes in the door, any type of indication, program, what have you, if you end up at a CRO, you'll get a wide variety of opportunities to use your scientific background. And so I was at Cato for 8 years, and a little over a year ago, I moved to King Pharmaceuticals, and I was the Director of Regulatory Affairs at King Pharmaceuticals, working on a platform of opioid products that are abuse deterrent. I'm happy to tell you guys what that is if you'd like, but since that's not the focus of this, I'll skip over that unless you want more details. But I work on opioid products and how to improve them. And now 3 months ago, Pfizer purchased King Pharmaceuticals, and so I now work for Pfizer. And I am Director of Regulatory Affairs for Pfizer at this point. So that's my story.
Thank you. I'll begin with some of the questions that you have posted. And the first question is, what kind of personal traits and background experience do you think would help a person succeed in a regulatory affairs career?
So I can jump in. So I tried to think proactive, or to think what kind of questions you guys might ask, and I came up with a list, and everyone can then just chime in. So good people skills, very important. You're basically acting as the middleman between the company that you're working for, the regulators, and sometimes even the consumer, in that you're helping to work on labeling and other sorts of activities. Excellent organizational skills is very important in dealing with the regulations and in kind of pulling the different pieces of information necessary together. You need to be able to be organized and coordinate these different areas. The ability to store and track the information, because there's a lot of information from a lot of different individual areas. So your skills in terms of organizing either people and activities, so applications, etc. A really important skill set is the ability to see the broad picture without getting lost in the details. So oftentimes people come to us with specific problems, and it's very easy to get lost in the details of the problem instead of seeing the bigger picture of how this specific small issue implicates the entire program, or perhaps in the bigger scheme of things, it really has no relative impact. But as the regulatory affairs professional on the project, it's your job to see the bigger picture beyond just the small issue that's being brought up. So your ability to kind of tease out what's really important about what you're dealing with. Being flexible and being able to change direction very quickly with new information. I'm sure any of us can give you examples where we had put together a beautiful and brilliant regulatory strategy for how to push a product forward, and then some clinical data or some CMC data comes out that says suddenly we don't have the shelf life that we thought we had, or we're not effective in a particular patient population, and an entire development program, millions of dollars are on the line in terms of, what is the next decision that we make about this development program. So the ability to be flexible in your thinking and creative and how to deal with these really significant challenges sometimes. And last thing that I came up with is superior communication skills. Because you're talking to a variety of people, you're really an internal vendor to the company, interfacing with all the different therapeutic, or well, not therapeutic areas, but all the different technical areas. So you've got preclinical or the non-clinical folks, you've got manufacturing coming in, or pharmaceutical development, or they're sometimes called. You've got people who are involved in the clinical side. So you're interfacing with these three groups internally, and also with the regulators, and as I mentioned, also with the consumers. So communication skills as well.
So I would add to Vicky saying that she's absolutely right. I agree with everything you said. There's a couple things that I would emphasize. One, it is very easy to get frustrated and angry when people don't agree with you. It is critical in this field not to burn your bridges, because you will be interacting with the same people over and over. And if you let some frustration ruin that relationship, that is a huge career hindrance. So it is an essential skill to learn to stand your ground without losing your temper. Two, I think one of the critical things, and this is something that Vicky's very good at, so I've learned a lot watching her review documents and some of the other submissions that went to the FDA, is that it's not so much looking at information for what is there, which is still really important in making sure all of that's accurate and correct. It's what's not there. And that's really difficult to identify. And that's where experience really helps. And I think we've all seen that through our careers, is that identifying the gaps in information people have presented to you can be a make it or break it thing with an application. I think the third one is just to keep in touch with people. I love LinkedIn. I don't always do everything with LinkedIn, but it's nice to be able to know where all of your contacts are. And there's lots of other networking venues. But keeping in touch with people and keeping a friendly relationship with representatives of the FDA is part of your job in regulatory affairs. Sometimes they are individuals just like the rest of us. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they have a bad day. But if you have a good relationship with those individuals, it goes a tremendous way into getting your application and your product further down the pipeline.
Yeah, I guess a couple other things. I'm really glad scientists are interested in regulatory affairs, because, part of, I see people that really are just successful in the regulatory area are people with a solid science background. Because at the end of the day, when you hit these hard points, either, the product tries to fall down, which a lot of products try to do, you have to figure out what are the data telling us. And the data has to drive the direction that you go. And so people that have a strong scientific background, it's just essential, whether it's looking at pharmaceutical development and helping those folks with the FDA and figuring out shelf lives and stuff, or whether it's a development program, trying to figure out what is that adverse event we're seeing, what does that new clinical finding we're seeing mean, and being able to get in that as an expert and be able to look at the details and interface in a collegiate way with your peers that are in the scientific side of the organization, or even on the commercial side of the organization about what does this look like? And then when you go talk to regulatory agencies, you're talking to them, again, about the data. So it's not a political thing, it's not a, my opinion, your opinion, it's, what are the data trying to tell us? So science is a key thing to success in that area. I think the other part of it is that a lot of people see regulatory folks as no people, that we're an extension of the FDA, we're regulators, we're enforcement people. That's not a way to be successful in regulatory affairs. And so a little bit about that. You really have to be able to look at things and figure out, okay, we got this issue, query people, what are we really trying to accomplish here? What it really is the message we're trying to say, and work with them to figure out where is the path forward. What is a regulatory path forward if we can figure out a way to position this and use the data to figure out how to go forward with it and to really, help people with it because, this is a highly regulated industry from the first time in man all the way until you decide to take a product off the market. There are a tremendous number of regulations around how we do the business, how we develop drugs and how we market drugs. So, we are there really to help them and be that kind of conduit person.
I think most of it covered. I would just really continue the previous 2 points because I work in academia and I think what points that you brought up are really important if you work in academia. First is that your clients, I'm not working in a company, so you don't have only one product and you're not dealing with the same people all the time. You have clients which are basically investigators around and for them their science is the most important. And that's the first thing. The second thing is that they not necessarily see this regulatory side. They don't see it as potentially unsafe. And you might really be as just a burden, just someone who wants to now almost skew their experiment inside. So both points that you brought up are really important. One is that they start to look at you differently when you are capable of understanding their project from a scientific point of view. You can discuss it. All 4 of us in a group have different backgrounds. I'm immunologist, the others are biochemists. You also try, we are working, whenever a project comes, whoever picked it up first works on a project, so we are not specialized in any area. But I really try to take immunological projects. My colleagues try to take biochemistry project, simply because you have more experience in that field and you know that you will reach investigator who is your client at that point when you are making certain comments or concerns or you're bringing up certain experiments, stuff like that. So in academia, I also think that that's very important. And yes, they will then look at you differently, so they will respect you a bit more what you're saying. So having a PhD in certain field, any field, medical field, would really be beneficial.
I think a lot's been covered on this question, but
Sorry, go last.
I think I would add being comfortable with decision making. No decisions made in a vacuum, and so with that, I would say there's a project management element, there's a decision making element, and there's confidence in your ability to assimilate a lot of information, understand the regulations to the best of your ability based on what's written, what you've experienced, in interfacing with the FDA, maybe across different divisions on different products, and having confidence in sitting in a meeting, either with the project team, with the FDA, and being asked to weigh in, on a recommendation on a strategy, to agree to something that the FDA is recommending, or to counter with a concession. So I think that that's something that is also, you have to be comfortable in these kind of environments.
One thing I would add, based on what Noah said, and it's a very good point, is that this is not a field to go into if you don't want to do the timeline. Because, I think that's true for many fields, but it's easy to think that regulatory affairs doesn't have the same kind of timelines as clinical trials and other fields you might consider. There are huge regulatory timelines that you have to meet or your product goes off the market. And there are huge sponsor-driven timelines where this product has to be, that NDA has to be in by a certain date, that IND has to be in by a certain date, this clinical trial has to be done by this certain date, or that company goes under. So you need to be able to drive that project, and any people management skills you can get now, even working with the undergrads in the lab, even working with the other grad students, that is extremely valuable for this field, but for probably any other field you'll go into as well.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that, I think what you're kind of saying in some ways is also dealing with what can seem like unreasonable deadlines that are dictated from upper management because of, a capital call that they had, the streets looking at you. You've got, top line data expected, Q2, which means you're going to file an NDA in Q4. Q4 rolls around and you start pulling, stability data to support the filing, and it's going south. It's, sometimes they may still expect you to file. So in those cases, you have to, you have to get creative. You have to look long term. And sometimes you have to, stick your ground with an unpopular decision.
And I think that the catchphrases to keep in mind are expectation management. That's one we use a lot. Is make sure that what the people you're working for, the people you're doing the work for, they expect is what you plan to deliver. And if you can't, make sure that those expectations are adjusted. But also make sure that you absolutely, completely understand the scope of the work that you're getting into. Because it's easy to agree, yes, we can file this IND in 3 months, and then find out that the non-clinical studies are still ongoing and they're not expected to finish until about 2 weeks before that you've agreed to file an IND. And the sponsor will look at you and say, well, you said you could file it in 3 months, and you have 2 weeks to write up this non-clinical data, not understanding that that affects everything else in the IND. So you need to be very clear on what those expectations are, both on the sponsor side, the company side, and on your side. And that applies to pretty much any industry as well, I think.
Okay, thank you.
How do you find out about regulatory affairs jobs that are available, and what kind of experience is required for entry-level positions?
Well, I'll jump on that one. Basically, when you read Science or Nature, I started gravitating towards science careers, nature jobs. I forget there were some other databases out there. And again, you start looking for how to get into the field, and you see that barrier of 4 years experience, 3 years experience, some experience, thinking, oh, I've got no experience. I think tying back to what Vicky was saying, there's the databases that present what jobs are out there, and then there's your own personal database of who you know. And as we all know, not everybody in academics stays in academics. Perhaps you already know people that are in other fields. And I actually found out about Cato research through somebody I went to grad school with in Connecticut, who then moved down here to work at Cato, and he's now at GSK. So again, as Kathy said, you don't want to burn your bridges. It's a small world. You end up knowing a lot of people that do different things. And I think, relying on your peers to kind of ask them how they got into what they're doing. You just kind of have to use all of those tools.
I'll just add to what Noah was saying is I would highly recommend that you, if you're interested in regulatory affairs specifically, join the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, or RAPS. That'll give you access to the Focus magazine, so you'll start to get familiar with the issues in the field. They have virtual career fairs, so that you, by searching, career-specific boards. There's also NCRAFT here, so North Carolina Regulatory Affairs Forum. They have tons of educational opportunities. There's lots of networking opportunities through them. I went in graduate school because I was naive in my understanding of the world of regulatory affairs. The first organization that I stumbled upon was DIA, which is the Drug Information Association. And I asked my advisor, since he knew that I wasn't going to go into academics, if I, instead of going to a typical conference, Gordon conference or something like that, if I could go to the DIA conference, because I knew that's where I needed to network. I didn't need to go to an academic conference, at least not at the time. And so that's what I did. I networked there. At DIA, they have lots of different career track type sessions and things where you can start to get an understanding of the field and things like that. And so I would highly recommend DIA, even though it's a much bigger organization and covers much broader topics in the area than just regulatory affairs. It's also a very good source, and they have an excellent careers type area on their website. Another place you can look for jobs and exposure is the Food and Drug Law Institute, or FDLI. They also have, career information and things on their website. And if you sign up to get their newsletter, you'll start getting information about the field.
I think, okay, I just want to say that between RUPS and NCRAF, since you are PhDs or postdoc, I can recommend, both are very good. NCRAF is cheaper to join. So that will be a big issue for being postdoc or PhD student. But I also can recommend the year that I took, and the last year of my postdoc, is to take RAP certificate, which you might or might not want to take, but NCRAF is organizing every summer, I think 12 weeks or 16 weeks every Tuesday here in North Pavilion, so it's very convenient for you to walk over. It's between like 6 and 8 once a week lectures that are preparing you for taking RAP certificate if you want to. You can also get discounted of books, you can get some, because RAPS is quite expensive, so if you can get some discount and if you can get some help preparing for a certificate, so you don't give like $500–600 and go there unprepared. So, and
Is that how much it costs?
yes, it's fine. But
But
that's up, it's also
for the record, that does include a membership too. It does, but
it does, but it's also, if you want to get some, RAPS also offers some like preparation courses or webcasts or something, and you can get discount via NCRAF and that group, and then it makes small study groups to prepare for taking certificate if you want to. So, and that's very local, just like 2 buildings away from here.
There's also a local SOCRA, Society for Research Associates, and although that's really more on the clinical side, they have meetings periodically that speak on the clinical topic and often on regulatory topics as well, if you just want to get a feel for what the industry is doing, the kind of challenges that they face. Just get familiar with the terminology, in some cases.
Yeah, I think, also kind of looking at, if you work anywhere in the pharmaceutical development area, or any part that touches into it, it's all regulated. And so, I look at GSK, we have 400 regulatory people in our organization, and they come from all parts of the organization. Many are not regulatory people true and true. They're people that were in the lab that, got involved either with stability issues and thought that was intriguing and started getting more into what's called CMC regulatory, the chemistry manufacturing side of the things. And through that avenue, you can kind of start getting more, just networking with the people in the company that are in that area to kind of see a way forward into that. People in clinical development, that's where I was for 15 years. I did, a lot of interaction through my regulatory person with the FDA and the EMEA and other folks. And it's through that interactions and building that experience actually made a venue for me to move over to that. So there's all kinds of ways. There's folks in legal, people that are lawyers that get into the regulation side of it, get into the advertising side of it, that, sometimes end up in regulatory affairs. So, we got people from all kinds of organizations, kind of what, you kind of need to think about to the future where you want to be. And kind of regulatory affairs where you want to get there, there's a whole lot of ways to get there. If you get frustrated one way or the other, well, there's probably another path to get there. And there's probably a path you can get into a certain part of regulatory affairs and you can move into a different area as you develop experience.
The challenge you face with this profession, like many other professions, is that a lot of jobs you find out about by word of mouth. So if you have contacts, if you have people that work in the industry, talk to them, and maybe they'll point you in the right direction. But the list of jobs on the science website or the Nature website is only a very few for the entire country. There's a lot more opportunities that are out there for that.
Thank you. At this time, the panel will entertain questions from the floor, if you have questions.
So when going into different fields, like if you're going to cancel fellowship and you go more into the clinical aspect of it, but in the midst of years spent in that area, this is an example. What type of route do you take to go back to the other side to the regulatory affairs, or even just within the industry setting in general? What type of fields do some people start out in and then make the decision to go to regulatory affairs afterwards?
I'll give you a really quick answer. In Cato all of the different disciplines really overlap a lot. So there are people that have started in clinical that went to regulatory went to clinical, people that are pretty much like half and half because it overlaps so much. But it all depends on your corporate philosophy.
No, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at it, the smaller the organization, the more hats people wear. Okay, so I go to work for a startup company with 20 people. You know, I'm probably going to do regulatory and something else, and next week I may do something else. And so you kind of have to, you know, your flexibility and your science background hopefully can give you that ability to do that. Other organizations, GSK, I mean, we're a huge multinational company. And so we are, you know, we're very divided. I mean, I'm in CMC regulatory at the moment, so I'm very focused. All I deal with is pharmaceutical development and manufacturing. So, you know, that's all I deal with at this point in time. I got other people that deal with how do you file INDs, other people how do you deal with NDA submissions, other people on how you deal with advertising. So, you know, we are very, very specialized. And so the people that work in those various groups usually come up through the disciplines. So, you know, people that work in the kind of the clinical development side, a lot of those people came out through clinical development. People in my CMC organization, a lot of them were chemists, PhDs in various disciplines. So, but like I said, it kind of depends on the organization. The CROs, they do everything. So kind of like a small business, you know, what's coming in the work today, kind of switch and go.
Well, in general, I don't think that if you get any experience in anything else in science, like clinical side, that would be negative for moving and starting basically from the beginning. So if you end up 1 year doing some clinical coordinator trial or clinical coordinator position and doing that stuff, and then you realize that's not for you, your chances of getting the regulatory job is sure not be diminished. When it comes to our organization, I mean, or DTMI, basically it's 4 of us in a regulatory group, then we have plenty of project leaders there, and we have people from office and license and venturing, then we start just communicating, and it's easy to meet people once when you are already outside of the lab, I would say. So, and again, any experience that you got in clinical trials in general, I think it's good, so.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Can you elaborate more on the RSCL certification? How many prerequisites?
No, basically you need to prepare, will you do it yourself at home, or will you take some classes and prepare or make a study group? That's up to you. Again, from RAPS, you can go and purchase webcasts and also tests, so you can practice a little bit before going and taking tests. But you don't need any special. Oh, maybe there are, but I think for PhDs that's not a problem. Maybe there are some. If you go to the RAPS.org website, you will see maybe there are some prerequisites, but I cannot really remember. I think you could just take it.
Well, and interesting enough, and this is kind of a sidebar, but DIA is now starting to offer a regulatory certificate as well. And that's only within the last year, so I'm not sure how far that's going to take off, but I think they're kind of starting to take away the RAPS as well.
Yes, in the back. Yes, the yellow shirt.
Oh, yeah. So I was wondering first, what is the work-life balance like in this career? And would you say that the work is more, how much of it is independent versus team-based?
It depends on what you do. I mean, for example, I just got back from Germany at midnight last night, so I haven't seen my kids for a while. You know, I think it depends on the program, like what your role is.
I think it depends mostly on the company. Like, so the size and the
Well,
company that you're at, and then your role is defined by that. Like,
Oh, yeah.
So my job at Pfizer, and you know, the experiences of a larger company is going to be different than the CRO, which is going to be different than someone who's working in academics, because just the size and the scale and the number of people who are working, it's going to vary.
And,
Oh, for
and
sure,
a lot of it
for
depends
sure.
on you as well. If you are extremely ambitious and your goal is to move up in the company and to take on these additional responsibilities and do these additional things so you reach whatever marker sooner, you're going to be working longer hours, you're going to have more responsibility, you're going to be more accountable because you're trying to reach those goals. And if that's your passion in life, absolutely. I think in all different companies, the more passion you put into it, the faster you move up. But at the same time, especially when my kids were preschool, I didn't want to be working 80 hours a week. My husband was already doing that. And the same thing for work-life balance. You can't have two parents working 80 hours a week. So we definitely worked to balance it. There were times when I needed to work 60 or 80 hours a week, and we would adjust. But in general, I was working maybe at most 50 hours a week on a typical week because we had two small children. I mean, now as they've gotten into elementary school, it's gotten a lot easier, but it's still, I mean, it's all, you can hold your ground, but there's still going to be some requirements no matter what. And if you don't put that passion into it, it will slow your progression.
I think it also depends on the project. I mean, all of us have a multiple project, so if we are working on BLA, there is more than 5 people involved in that. It's a big project, a grant submission. So we are dividing the groups. Then again, putting or preparing one IND, that's only my thing. And my colleagues is doing another one and another one, which means that in that case, you can organize your time the way you want, and you can write it at night if you prefer, or in the morning if you prefer. At the end, we will deliver. But these are, I mean, depends on the size of the project.
I would just add that since you're kind of looking from the outside in, as a general rule, and this isn't true for every single person in every single situation, but CROs or someone who's working at a CRO is probably going to have more hours in terms of, because they're in a billing situation, they're a consultant, and so you're writing down every 15-minute increment of your time has to be accounted for, and you're kind of judged by that, but you know, there's billable hour basis. It's like working in a law firm, and so it's a very different environment, and the amount of kind of focus on the total number of hours worked in a week is different than in a pharmaceutical company where you're not specifically accountable for every increment of time. You're accountable for an end product at a given deadline, and so you know your work-life balance is going to be different just based on that. And also in a CRO, because you're a vendor, you're providing a service. So if someone comes in with a very unrealistic or unreasonable request, but you've taken on the contract, you're still committed to getting it done, even if it takes every single hour of every day to get it done. And so it's just just so that if you're looking at jobs at a CRO, just recognize that that's a vendor situation or a consultant situation versus a pharmaceutical company. It's a kind of different world.
Well, on the team approach, I mean, you heard it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to file an NDA, and it takes a village to file IND, because it's a huge piece of work. You may feel like you're the primary driver, but there's tons of people that you are relying on to get their parts done.
I would also say in many cases, it's not a whole lot worse than being in academics.
Yeah.
If you're coming in to check your cells or your mice on the weekends, you're coming in late at night to add buffers or check on experiments. I mean, it's all give and take. I mean, you put in a lot of hours in academics, you put in a lot of hours in industry.
But the pay is way better.
One last question, and then we'll just ask for maybe 2 people to respond in the essence of time. Yes, sir.
How much of a medical background does one need to get into these regulatory affairs? I mean, I have a chemistry background, and I don't know pretty much nothing about medicine except I go once in a while to the doctor or my child to the doctor, and so I don't know anything really about whatever cells and all that.
Well, I can tell you in our regulatory affairs,
You can read, you can do it.
we have 400 people, like I said, in our regulatory affairs group at GSK, and I don't think currently we have a single position.
Now, there's a huge need for people with chemistry backgrounds, because there's so much CMC that people that came through biology don't understand. And CMC is chemistry, manufacturing, controls.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, our hour has ended. Thank you very much to our panelists.